Good evening. It's a real pleasure to have all of you here for this First Alabama Bank sponsorship. Please turn off your cell phones this time. If you can't turn them off, take a hammer out and beat them to death so we won't have any interruptions. I think we're going to have the most exciting program that we've had around here lately. And I say that because Ruth Cook, who has fun and an informative program for us today, has done all sorts of research on names and what have you, but I'll let her handle that for you. Ruth, as you know, has a degree in English and German from Ohio State University. She moved to Alabama in 1970, and since then she's learned about cornbread and buttermilk and good stuff. So she is a native of Sylacauga. She lives in Hoover, but I tell everybody she's from Sylacauga. Don't worry about it. But she's served on the board of the Writing Conference of the Alabama Writers Forum, and she has had books that she's written, history books, north across the river, and we have that here if you want to check it out. It's the story and the arrest of deportation of Georgia cotton mill workers during the Civil War. It's a sensational book, but the book that really did a lot of international attention was Guest Behind Barbed Wire, the book that she wrote about the German prisoner of war camp in Aliceville. But that is just nothing compared to what she did, the magic of marble for us. So her work, her information, she'll probably have a question and answer session, but pay close attention because you'll walk away from this happier than you've been in a long time. Let's welcome Ruth home. Ruth, come on in.
Thank you, Ted. Okay, thanks. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. It's always nice to come back to Sylacauga. And we're going to talk today about something called toponymics. That was not a word I'd ever heard before I started working on this project. But it's the perfect title for what we're going to talk about, because toponymic refers to the origins and background of names of geographical places. And that's what we're going to talk about, some of the oddly pronounced and some of the oddly originated towns in the state of Alabama. Let me see if I can get, oh, she's already got it up. Okay. The first one I'm going to tell you about, I'm going to talk first about pronunciation. And I have a funny story to tell you about that. Many of you may remember Marianne Motes Weber now. She wrote a book called Truman Capote's Southern Years, and she worked for quite a while here in Sylacauga. And in 1990, after her book had come out, they had a play on Broadway at the Booth Theater, West 45th Street, and it was called True, T-R-U. And Robert Morris, the actor, played the part of Truman Capote on the stage. So Marianne is still one of my closest friends, and she decided that the two of us needed to go to New York and see that play so that she could give him an autographed copy of her book about Capote's childhood. And I thought, well, that sounds like that. So we went up to New York. She had gotten us tickets in the second row. We watched the play. And when it was over, she had arranged for us to go back to Robert Morris's dressing room so she could present this book. So we go back there, and she gave him the book. Now, Marianne grew up in Andalusia, but she spent most of her early married life in Monroeville. So she knew Truman Capote's aunts, you know, the eccentric aunts and all those people in those stories. And so they went back and forth for a few minutes about Monroeville memories, and then Marianne got this serious look on her face. She had not told me ahead of time that she was going to do this. And she said, Mr. Morris, there's just really one thing I do need to talk to you about. And he said, oh, what's that? And she said, you cannot stand up here on this New York stage and mispronounce the name of one of the major cities in Alabama. It is, recognize that city? It's Mobile, Mr. Morris, not mobile. So, first we're going to talk about some other cities in Alabama. Many of them are small towns, but we're going to talk about where the names came from and how people pronounce them. Now, one of those is Arab. Now, as Ted told you, I moved here in 1970. That's a long time ago. But I remember thinking, why did they say Arab? It looks like Arab to me. But it has nothing to do with Arabs. The name doesn't. The man who founded the town was named Stephen Tuttle Thompson. He founded the town in the 1840s originally. And like many, many of these small towns across the state, they got their names in relationship to the railroad coming through, the tracks of the railroad coming to the town, and then it would build up. So in the 1850s, he had built quite a nice village together in this town, but it didn't have an official name. Everybody just called it Mr. Thompson's Village. So finally, in 1882, they decided, well, we need our own post office. And when you apply to have a post office, you have to have an official name. So Mr. Thompson filled out all the paperwork, and he sent in 3 suggestions of names for this town. One of them was Inc. Why, I don't know. He wanted to call it Inc, Alabama, or Bluebird, Alabama. But the other choice he suggested was the middle name of his son. He thought it would be really nice if his son's name was in the town. Now, his son's name was Ranson A. Rad, with a D, Thompson. So he submitted that, and the U.S. Postal Service chose that name. The problem was they misspelled it when they filled out the paperwork. And so by the time all these, letters to tack up on the post office and all the paperwork and all of that came, it was a little bit late to change it. So the reason it's Arab is because it was supposed to be Arad, and that was pronounced that way. So there's the story of Arab. Anybody heard that before? Now, the next one that I'm going to talk about, I wouldn't even know where this place is if I didn't have 2 sons who absolutely love stock car racing, or basically any kind of car racing. And there is a place in northern Jefferson County, about 16 miles north of Birmingham, and we call it Sayre. Now, there's only one E on the end of it, but we call it Sayre. Anybody been to Sayre? It doesn't exist much anymore, but they still have the speedway. As you can see here, there's the logo. They call it the South Action Track, Sayre, Alabama. And every year in this summer, I think it is, they have a King's Race, and they crown the king of Southern racing there. That's about all you can say about Sayre these days. But I got curious when I was doing my research. I wondered where the name Sayre came from. And when I looked that up, I found that there's not only our Sayre in Alabama, but there's one in western Oklahoma, and there's one in Pennsylvania. But they call theirs a borough. It's Sayre Borough. But I thought, okay, well, I'm going to find out if they pronounce it the way we do. So I got on the phone. I called the city hall in Sayre, Oklahoma. Very nice lady answered the phone, and I said, I'm just curious. Do you pronounce the name of your town Sayre? And she said, no, why would we do that? So I explained to her, and she was quite amused, and I thanked her for letting me know. And then I hung up, and I called Sayre Borough in Pennsylvania. Got another very nice lady on the phone who said, no, we only have one E, so we say Sayre. But she also was amused. But she was the one who told me where the name came from. All 3 of those towns, Sayre here, Sayre, and Sayre Borough in the other 2 states, are all named after a railroad pioneer and stockholder in several different railroad companies named Robert H. Sayre, S-A-Y-R-E. So we still pronounce it the way we do, and they pronounce it the way they do, and that's the background on Sayre. Now, as far as pronunciation goes, there's a little town down in Pickens County, and it is called reform. Now, the word R-E-F-O-R-M, as far as general use in the English language, is reform. The accent's on the second half. But in Pickens County, it's reform, and there's an interesting story behind that as well. Way back in the early 1800s, before you had all these railroad tracks coming through, this little community in Pickens County was just a few little shanties and a very, very rowdy saloon. So let me see, I've got to get this straight now on the time. They got their own post office in 1841. But shortly before that, a certain Methodist missionary preacher came through the area. And his name, you may have heard this name, his name was Lorenzo Dow. But everybody called him Lorenzo Crazy Dow because he was a very eccentric preacher. And he, preached fire and brimstone and all that kind of stuff. So he showed up in that little settlement, and he said, well, I want to have a revival here. I'm going to put up a tent, and everybody can come, and we'll sing hymns and blah, blah, blah. Well, the people didn't want that, and they decided they were going to tell him he wasn't welcome. So they told Preacher Dow that he wasn't going to put on a revival there, and he was not welcome. So they told him to get on his horse and go somewhere else. So he got on his horse, but this group of people, this was right before 1840, this group of people wanted to get their own post office. And again, they had to have a name for the town. They couldn't just call it Shanty or whatever. So as Preacher Dow was getting on his horse, several of these little smart alecks from the saloon called up and said, hey, preacher, what do you think we ought to call our town? We got to give it a name. What do you think it should be? And according to the legend, Lorenzo Dow turned around and said, call it reform, brethren. You need some reform around here. So that's how you get reform in Pickens County. Now, enough on the pronunciation. And there's a picture of him up there, by the way. There's also a place in Elmore County that I'm sure you've heard of called Slapout. I see some people nodding. It's also called Holtville. The people who really don't want to be from Slapout, Alabama, call it Holtville. But it was settled like reform in the early 1800s. But the name Slapout didn't come around until the 1920s. And in the 1920s, there was a man named Oscar Peoples who opened up a general store in Holtville. And he wasn't a very good store owner. According to the history, they all said that the store that Mr. Peoples had was a sorry excuse for a store. And the reason it was a sorry excuse is that every time you went in there and ordered something, a bucket of nails or some thread or fabric or whatever you came for, he'd just say, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm slap out of all that. Now, some other people claim that it's simply slap out in the middle of nowhere, and that's why it has the name. But most people from that area will tell you it had to do with Oscar Peoples' store. There's also, anybody ever heard of Brooklyn, Alabama? It's not really there anymore, but I assumed whenever I came across that it was named for Brooklyn, New York. It's not. It's named for a town called Brooklyn, Connecticut, of all places. And it was founded in 1820 by a man named Edwin Robinson. It was that area where Brooklyn was in, now I'm got to be sure I pronounce this correctly, Kaneka, okay. I knew I didn't have it. Anyway, in that area in the county was a cotton producing area. And so one of the reasons that Brooklyn, Alabama was founded was because that's on the river, the Sepulga River. And so people could bring their cotton and their other produce and things, and it could be shipped down the Sepulga River, the Escambia River, or the Kaneka River to Pensacola and then to other places. But what happened over time was the railroads came in, the highways came in, and it was easier to ship things that way, so the town kind of fell apart. But they did get their first post office in, let me see, where was it? 1840, I think it was. Anyway, they had a post office there. But you can see in this picture, that's the general store in Brooklyn, Connecticut. And the post office was inside the general store, which way back when was a common thing. You probably are familiar with other towns where the post office is inside the store. And it was there from the beginning until 2011 when it was closed. And it made national news because it was one of the very last inside a general store post offices in the country when it closed. But the town's pretty much not there anymore, but there is this marker that gives the history. And the marker is actually in memory of a particular woman named Lori Rawls Hameter. And the reason they honored her with that plaque is that from 1954 until 1991, she was the postmistress at the post office inside the general store. Now, this was one of the more unusual names I came across. Have any of you ever been to Graball, Alabama? I hadn't either. It's in Henry County, which is down in southeast Alabama. And that's a really unusual name. There's a grocery store at the intersection of Highway 10 and County Road 45, and that's about all there is. But according to a man whose name I'm sure you recognize, Jimmy Rain, he's the Yellowwood guy. He grew up in Abbeville, which is right near Graball. And he tells the story that the way this town got its name is that general store that they have at the crossroads. At night, people would come and gamble in the back room. They'd play poker, they'd do whatever, but anyway, all kinds of gambling going on in that back room. And one night, one of the players looked up and saw the police coming. He said, "Oh my gosh, they're going to come and raid us. Grab all the money and go." And that's how it got its name, according to Jimmy Rain, anyway. Now, many of you have probably been to Bug Tussle. They used to have a great steakhouse there, and I can remember back in the 1970s going out there and having a really nice steak dinner on Sundays or Saturday afternoon or whatever. They had really good steaks and sides. But the background of Bug Tussle is kind of interesting, too, before I talk about the steakhouse. It was originally called the Narrows. And if you look at this photograph was taken about 1901, 1902. And all four of those buildings were built before 1900. And it was called the Narrows because it was in a little valley between two mountains. But then somebody came traveling through one time and was talking to people outside the general store, and he looked down, and there were all kinds of bugs just swarming around, maybe on a banana peel or on something, and he said, "My goodness, those bugs are really tussling." And supposedly, that's where it got its name. But apparently, that's not too far off the truth, because when I dug around, I found out there's a Bug Tussle, Texas, and there's another Bug Tussle in Oklahoma. So that expression, apparently, back in the 1800s, the early 1900s, was fairly common. If you saw a bunch of bugs doing this, you called it tussling. The one in Texas got its name, according to legend, when they were having an ice cream social. And somebody dropped their ice cream. And whoom, here comes all these bugs just tussling all over that ice cream. The one in Oklahoma, it was just a matter of there were bugs all over the place. And so apparently that expression, again, was used there. But one of the other interesting things about Bug Tussle is the national publicity, not negative publicity, it got in 1938. Now, in the early 1900s, Sears Roebuck and Montgomery Ward and some of these other catalog companies were very, very popular. You know, they would mail you the catalog. I can remember looking through them, before Christmas, even in my childhood. But people could order from these catalogs and have it shipped to them. Well, in 1938, Sears Roebuck and Montgomery Ward and several of the others decided that they would offer their customers credit. In other words, you could order what you wanted, have it shipped to you, and then you could pay for it in, increments over time. Well, there were 7 fellas in Bug Tussle, Alabama, who figured that they could game that practice. And so they began ordering all kinds of stuff. They ordered stoves, they ordered overalls, they ordered shoes, had it all shipped to Bug Tussle. But on the order, the name that they put was not their own name. They ordered under the name of their dog, their cat, their grandfather who wasn't around anymore, just any name they could think of. So here comes all this stuff. And then when Sears or whoever starts sending the bills are coming back returned. There's no such person. So eventually, of course, they sent the police. And the police tracked down these 7 men and arrested all of them for mail fraud. But the last thing about Bug Tussle is the challenge that they had for the 64-ounce steak. If you went, back in the 70s at least, if you went out to have a nice dinner at the steakhouse in Bug Tussle, on your menu it would say, if you can eat a 64-ounce steak along with a potato and a salad, your meal will be entirely free. And so there were a number of people who tried that, but according to the owners of the Bug Tussle Steakhouse back in 1981, there was only one man who ever actually was able to do that. He ate the whole steak, the whole potato, and the whole salad, and then, according to legend, he asked for coffee and pie for dessert. Okay, so another town you've probably heard of is this one. And it's not eclectic, it's only 3 syllables, eclectic, which is a word, if you check in the dictionary. Eclectic means when you take a whole bunch of different stuff and mix it all together. So something that's eclectic is kind of mixed together. Now, the city of Eclectic, which is in Elmore County, was founded sometime in the late 1800s. They got their first post office in 1879. But the man who founded this town was a medical doctor. I say medical with quotation marks. His name was M.L. Fielder, and he had all these herbal medicines that he was selling. And he named the town after his eclectic medicines. So that's how it got its name. And then there are 2 towns in Alabama. Shirley's still sitting over there, good. There are two towns in Alabama where the name of the town is the first and last name of a person. Anybody know what those 2 towns are? Can you guess? Phil Campbell is one of them, exactly. And there's a couple stories that go with that. Anybody know what the other one is? Susan Moore. So we don't have a Ruth Cook, Alabama, and we don't have a Shirley Spears, Alabama, but we have Susan Moore and Phil Campbell. Phil Campbell is in Franklin County. Last I checked, it had a population of about 900 people. It was founded in the 1880s, and again, it was named in connection with a railroad. But the Phil Campbell was not the name of the man who founded the town. The man who founded the town was named Mel Allen. But he hired an engineering builder to come and build a depot. I didn't give you the picture. To build a depot and a sidetrack that would run into their little town to, drum up business. So he promised that engineer, he said, okay, if you do a really good job on getting this sidetrack in here and building us a depot, I will name the town for you, because I have to do that to get the post office. Well, the engineer did a good job, and that's how you got the town of Phil Campbell. But there's another interesting story that goes way up to 1995, which some of you may remember. There was an author who was from Illinois, I believe, but he was living in New York at the time, and he came across this name of this town in Alabama. Well, that's my name. And he decided it would be really, really fun to have a convention of all the people named Phil Campbell and have them all come to Phil Campbell, Alabama. 22 of them did. And one woman showed up. Her name was Phyllis Campbell, but she came to the convention too. And they had it named that for several years. But you know, after you've been a Phil Campbell who went to Phil Campbell, Alabama, after a few years, you didn't keep going. They still have that same festival every year, but it's now called Downtown Hoedown. And you know, you can go and they have all kinds of activities in the summertime for that. So that's one of them. The other one I mentioned was Susan Moore. Anybody been to Susan Moore? People don't travel around these little towns that much, do you? Okay. Susan Moore, Alabama is in Blount County. It's just north of Aniata. And it was settled in 1865 by a man named Robert Moore. But it wasn't called Susan Moore. It was called Clarence. Can you imagine living in a town called Clarence, Alabama? I could not find the origin of why it was called Clarence. It might have been his great-grandfather or an uncle he didn't like or something, I don't know. But in 1865, it was called Clarence. But in 1923, they built a beautiful new high school in Clarence, Alabama. And they decided to name the high school after the daughter of Robert Moore, who was the owner. And you can see some of their family photographs over there. So her name was Susan. So they named the high school Susan Moore. And they liked that so much better than Clarence that they ended up naming the town for her as well. So that's how you got Susan Moore. And then finally, I want to talk about two towns that are actually pronounced exactly the same way, but they're not spelled the same way, and there's a good reason for that. There's Gewin, and then there's Gewin. And the story behind this is kind of interesting. Again, the railroad was involved. The way Gewin, G-U-I-N, there it is. The way Gewin in Marion County first got its name was again because they were setting up a post office. And it was also connected with the railroad. Dr. Jeremiah Gewin, sold part of his farm to the Frisco Railroad so that they could bring railroad tracks into Gewin, and that would help build up the town. So he arranged for them to bring the railroad tracks through Gewin. And this happened in 1889. And so what the Frisco Railroad did was they sent a work crew to Memphis, Tennessee, and had them start laying track towards Gewin, Alabama. And then they sent another work crew to Birmingham and had them lay track to Gewin. And when the two came together in 1889, they did the same thing they did at, I think it's called Promontory Point out west, where they drove a golden spike when the railroad connected. They did the same thing in Gewin, Alabama. When those two sets of track connected, they connected them with a golden spike. At that time, Gewin was very successful. They had 13 storehouses in the town. They had 4 hotels, 2 cotton yards, a livery stable, a schoolhouse, a Masonic lodge, and 60 residences. So it was a fairly successful town. They also had several saloons in 1889, but they all got closed down in 1890 when they passed a law that you couldn't have a saloon in Gewin. So they also decided they needed to hire their first policeman after they, incorporated the town and the railroad came through and everything. So they hired a policeman from up in Birmingham, and he came down and became the chief of police and the only policeman in Gewin, Alabama. He stayed about a year and a half, and then he went to the mayor and he said, it's so peaceful here. I'm bored to death. I'm going back to Birmingham. So he decided he didn't want to be the policeman in a town that didn't need one. There was a little tiny settlement between Gewin, the town that had all the stuff and the railroad, and Winfield, Alabama, over here, and here's Gewen. And there was this little settlement in between. And they had their claim to fame was a drive-in theater. But in 1950, Gewen, Guin, decided, we want to annex that little town. We want to make them part of our city. Well, the people in this little town, which didn't have a name of its own at that point, were kind of like Greenland or Connecticut or Canada. They said, we don't want to be part of your city. We want to have our own city. So George Thornton became the first mayor and the owner of the drive-in in Gewen. Do I have another? Yeah. In Gewen, pronounced the same way, but it's Gu-Win because it's between the real Gewen and Winfield. And he was also the owner of the drive-in theater. Up until 1950, I forgot to tell you this, up until 1950, that little settlement between Winfield and Gewen was called Ear Gap. I looked all over the place and I couldn't find anywhere else in the world named Ear Gap or why they called it that. But obviously, when they decided to incorporate, they wanted a better name than that. So you have Gewen and you have Gewen. And this Gewen has a drive-in, and this Gewen is a lot bigger. And that's the story. So the last thing I'm going to say about this, and you can share some things if you want. Most of you are aware of the history of the name of Sylacauga. In my book, Magic in Stone, it explains it according to my research that it was Shawnee Native American people who came down to Alabama in 1748, and they established a village on the banks of the Coosa River. And they called that little village Chilocogay. And you can kind of see the progression of spelling through time. Chilocogay became at one point Silocuga. Somebody was telling me earlier today that they still hear people who aren't from here trying to pronounce it that way. And then you had Sewillacuga or Kaga, and at one point it had 2 L's and 2 G's, but now it's Sylacauga. Now, as I've given talks around the state about the marble, the magic of marble, and your wonderful festival, which is coming up in April, I've had people disagree with me about the origin of the word Sylacauga. One of them is a man down in Fairhope who absolutely insists that there was a Frenchman over in Georgia who founded Sylacauga back in the 1750s. I can't find anything other than his word about that. There's also a Piqua Native American chief here in Alabama who says it wasn't the Shawnee, it was some other group that came in here with the Frenchmen from Georgia. Now, I don't know about any of that, but I'm sticking by it was the Shawnee from Ohio who came down here and started Chilocogay, which led to Sylacauga. I hope you found this informative and also fun. And I think, how are we doing on time? We have a little bit of time if any of you want to share any information that you know about these towns that I talked about, or if you have a favorite weirdly named place here in Alabama you'd like to talk about, I'd love to hear about it. So anybody have anything they want to share? Yes.
I live in Odina, and it was named for John Piney Odin, who founded his plantation there.
Ah.
And they were to have a post office come in, so they had to have a name for it. And there's already Odinville in St. Clair County, and so his wife picked out Odina, which is Odin with an A on the end, because she said that was the Greek spelling or something. It meant beautiful, something like
Yeah.
that. So it's, we had a preacher come by one time, there, and he pronounced it Odinay. we even have a street in Odina that's...
And it has 2 E's in it, doesn't it, Odina? Does it have 2 E's or one?
No, just one.
One, okay.
Odena.
Okay.
We have a street that's Odina spelled backwards, which was Anita. Something like that.
Yeah. You never know what's going to come up, do you? So that's interesting. Anybody else has something?
I think Fairhope is an interesting name, you know.
It is. Do you want to talk about?
No, you talk about it. You know, I know. You talk about it. Tell me
Well,
about
you
it.
correct me if I don't have it right. I had a home in Fairhope at one time, and it's one of my very favorite places to go to visit. And when I when I had the house there, I bought it from somebody else who didn't deal with the history. But when I went, I had to go before the council in Fairhope, because in Fairhope, you have to, it's kind of like a commune in a way. And it was founded by people from Iowa who were, I don't remember the group, but it was a religious group of some sort. And anyway, you had to go before this council and explain why you had this house and, all this kind of stuff. But I have not researched Fairhope beyond the fact that I know that those people who first came there in sometime in the 1800s saw it as a fair hope for the world. Beyond that, I don't know, but I'll go look it
It
up.
was a single tax colony when it first started.
Right.
You know.
And it still was when let's see, when was that? Around 1990, I think. But it still was at that point. In other words, all of your utilities and expenses that would normally be separate in city government were all under one tax that you paid. And there were some other things you had to read the history of. I mean, you had to really indicate that you were serious about being there and knowing where you were. So, yeah. Anything else? Uh-huh.
I don't want that. I don't want it. Rimlout.
Oh, yes.
I heard that they had a name, and it was Palmer backwards. Is that
It is.
right?
It is.
Okay.
I do happen to know that story, and I had it in this program until I started looking at my watch and decided I didn't have time for it. Remlap is literally Palmer spelled backwards. And both of these are up in, I think it's northern Jefferson County, near Pinson. But Palmerdale was named for, there were two brothers that settled in the county here. And one of them founded a town first, and he named it Palmerdale. Well, then his brother moved off a little ways and decided that he would have his own town, but he couldn't call it Palmer because his brother had already taken that. And he literally turned it around backwards and made it Remlac. So if you've been to Remlac, look at it again, because it's really Palmer backwards. That's true, yeah. There's another interesting story about that. I don't want to keep anybody past their time. There's another interesting story about Palmerdale in particular. Back in the 1930s, after the Great Depression, there was a, what do I want to call it? There was a commission established, not just in Palmerdale, but in several places around the country, where they would develop housing and schools and things like that for people who had been displaced during the Depression. And they had these little communities. And there is still a building in Palmerdale that was like the community building for that settlement during the, I don't have all the details because they didn't follow through, but you're right, it's Remlac and Palmer, yeah. So. No, it's true, it is. So, well, where?
Akron, Alabama.
That's interesting. I haven't pursued that one, but I'm from Ohio, and I know all about Akron and the rubber business. What do you? What?
In Hale County.
Hale County. Do you know anything about why it's called Akron?
No,
I'll go find out. Okay.
I don't know if it's named from Akron, Ohio, or something.
Probably. Yeah. I don't know.
What about Pansy, Alabama?
Where?
Pansy?
Pansy. I have heard of that, but again, I didn't go look that up. I'll put them on my list. So for the next program.
Where Lucy Baxley was from. It's where Lucy Baxley was from.
Ah, okay. Yeah. I knew Lucy at one time.
I rode by there, but I couldn't see anything.
Yes, you had one?
Have you heard of Goodwater, Alabama?
Of where?
Goodwater.
I have heard of it.
I'm from Goodwater, and I don't know how true this is, but I heard that the Native Americans was passing through, and they take a drink from the Hatchet Creek and say, good water, and that's how the name came. Yeah, so
That sounds good to me. So,
I don't
and
know how true that
where
is.
is Goodwater?
It's a neighboring county, just right outside of Sylacauga, about 20 miles. That's where I
Okay.
live. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have to go up there and write all this down. Thank you.
One, in southern Clay County, about 4 or 5 miles north of Goodwater, there's a community called Cleveland's Crossroads.
Yes.
And back in the probably the late 1800s, they were going to establish a post office. And apparently a man named Cleveland was the leader of that community. And they asked him what they wanted to name the post office and said Cleveland's Crossroads. He said, well, that's too long of a name. What's your first name? So he said Elias. And that was the name of the post office.
Eli?
And Elias. But everybody calls it Cleveland's Crossroads. It's just a rural community.
Yeah.
They probably hadn't been a post office there in more than 100 years.
Interesting. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, she has another one. Okay. Time-wise, are we okay? Pardon?
How did it get its name? Sockapatoy.
Now, I
How
haven't-
did you? It's
spell that.
SOCAPAT something. What'd you say?
Sulcatory?
No, Sockapatoy. It's down below Goodwater.
Okay.
It used to be on, I guess, 231 or something going toward Eric
I'll get my
City.
map out and look it up and find out what I can.
If you go down 280 where it crosses Highway 9,
Uh-huh.
that's Sockapatoy, where 9 and
Sockmatory?
Socopotoy.
Have not come across that one. Okay, great. Well, thank you all. I hope you found this interesting. It was really fun to put it
Miss Ruth,
together.
we've got
Oh,
one more
I'm
right
sorry.
here, if you don't mind.
We have one near Eclectic. We're near Eclectic, and this is an unincorporated community, and it's called Flea Hop.
I have heard of that, but I didn't even know where it was.
Fleahop. And I just looked it up as to why, and it said because the fleas kept hopping off the goats onto the people.
That's great. That's great. Flea Hop, Alabama.
Flea Hop, Alabama.
That's
and there's a
great.
street that leads into that unincorporated community called Flea Hop Street.
And you don't want to take your goats down there, right?
I guess not.
Thank
That's
you.
great. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions?
Well, thank you all for coming. This was really fun.
Thank you, Miss Ruth. Miss Ruth always does such a good job, and I was sitting there listening thinking James Spann would be so proud today because these are all the names we hear him talk about on his weather reports. Thank you again, Miss Ruth. She does such a good job with anything she does for us. She's such a good friend to the Comer Library. I want to remind you next week we have a really good program. We have Katie Lamar Jackson coming, and she's going to do a great story about a Green Beret in the Vietnam War, Mr. Benny Atkins, and it's just a heroic story that she was able to capture from him, and I think those are the kind of stories we all need to hear. Again, we want to thank Dr. Shirley Spears with the Comer Library Foundation for all the hard work she does, Dr. Ted Spears for always giving us great introductions, to the First Bank of Alabama for always being such a phenomenal sponsor for our programs. They make these kinds of things possible, and also to the Hickory Street Cafe at Coast Valley Medical Center for giving us these great cookies every week. Thank you all so much for coming out and being a part of our crowd today. We'll see you next week. Thank you.